Hello, this is Jacob Moat, and today I'm presenting my persuasive speech. Growing up, my family was always in the middle class, but when I was a teenager, my family started to acquire way more money. And even though we started becoming more wealthy, I still acted out and got a lot of complaints from neighbors and other parents because I was a very rowdy teen growing up. Parents always used to ask why, and I was never able to tell them. And this was just because I was behaving like a dumb teenager who was not fully capable of understanding his actions or the consequences that came with them. Stories like this happen to millions of teens all across the world. And it doesn't matter what racial or social demographic they belong to, it's just a psychological impulse for teens to test and break boundaries that are given to them by people of authority. I have researched this topic in great depth over multiple years and have shared experience with the team. Due to this shared experience and knowledge, this gives me a lot of credibility in the topic. Juvenile delinquency is a normal thing teens experience, and considering this, early to middle-aged teens should not be incarcerated with adults. I will be discussing this in 3 main points. The first is why teens have the psychological impulse to be insubordinate. The second is why you should agree that incarcerating teens with adults is very dangerous and problematic as well as reckless. And the last is better alternatives for breaking habits and preventing them with communication techniques and other techniques. Now that I have discussed the content I'm going to be persuading you with, it is time to move on to the first point, and this is being the psychological impulse. Teens have always struggled with being insubordinate to their superiors. Other people like to call it acting up. While other teens also struggle in other situations with being insubordinate. According to Secure Teen, a website, teens are still immature and don't think like adults. Therefore, they are prone to making mistakes and committing crimes that fully aren't in their control. This is because children have not fully developed into the people they are going to be for the rest of their lives yet, so they're not completely responsible for their actions or the situation that caused that action. This is because kids usually learn the rules by breaking them. I know this is not the best way of doing this, and I also did this myself, but this is because teens require the most amount of patience than any other group in America. There are many reasons as to why teens acquire juvenile delinquency. According to Raising Children, it's just because of the way teens' brains developed. Your teen can't always handle the changing of feelings and reactions to everyday or unexpected things. And this can sometimes lead to oversensitivity, which can lead to grumpiness or rudeness. Teens' brain development also affects a teen's ability to empathize and understand other people's perspectives, including yours and the parents. This can also result in teens growing up being much more sensitive, angry, and behaving out of the ordinary. When teens do act insubordinate and it's not out of the ordinary is during puberty. This is when teens are more emotional and more sensitive. I used to struggle with this, and so did my siblings, but eventually we grew out of it. Now that I have talked about why teens have the psychological impulse to be insubordinate, I will now move on to why you should agree that teens should not be incarcerated with adults. There are a lot of reasons as to why teens should not be locked up with adults in prison. There are psychological factors, social factors, and potential crime risks. I will be discussing also incarceration rates between countries that do incarcerate teens with kids and countries that don't. When teens are incarcerated with adults, a chain of events is set into motion. The first thing that happens is that the teen starts to believe that they are indeed a criminal like all the other men in the jail, when they might have made a mistake while maturing. Then, if they are locked up for long periods of time, they will start to believe this even more, and gradually they will become more at risk to being dominated by men. This is not a good picture to paint, but it is the reality that teens face while being in prison. Prison is indeed a dangerous place where the strongest survive and the strongest are in the best position, which are indeed the adults and not the teen. This is way different than juvenile detention centers. These are focused on placing teens in buildings with prison-like formats together with teens and no adults. This leads to the suicide rate being 7.7 times lower for kids in juvenile detention centers than kids in prison. This is an alarming number and is also caused by the abuse of teens in jail by older people. Not only is the suicide rate higher for kids that are in prison, but they are more likely to be repeat offenders when they were in prison with men. This proves that this is not the most effective or safe method. According to Zeidenberg, the U.S. imprisons the most teens than any other country, and is alarming because in 100,000 youth in America, 336 of them are incarcerated, while the second highest country or continent is South America with 69 out of 100,000. This is also crazy because the higher incarceration rates in the United States do not lead to a lower reincarnation status. The U.S. incarcerates roughly 4.8 times more than the second highest country, which is startling because when we incarcerate them, they usually come back. This is because we are way behind in handling juvenile delinquency. Now that we have discussed why you should agree that locking up teens with adults is very reckless, we can now move on to discussing certain ways to break habits and prevent it from happening in the first place. There are many ways to break/prevent insubordinance. These can be programs, juvenile detention centers, and different communication techniques. The first thing is to pick up on it when it happens. You can notice this by picking up signs of irritability, lashing out, fits of rage, and many other out-of-character things. The first thing to do is set up rules of communication. According to healthy families, once the kids know the rules exactly, and know where the line is, and know what not to do with the consequences. The next thing to do is to be a role model, praise teens for positive communication, use humor, and stay calm. If the teens don't listen to this, you can enroll them in programs to warn them about their dangerous behavior. This is according to impact law. An example of this is functional family therapy. This requires a therapist to enter the home and come up with a plan with every single person in the family in order to break the child's insubordinate factors. The last alternative, if that doesn't work, is to place them in the juvenile detention centers and correctional youth facilities. These are aimed to eliminate behavioral habits and clump the teens together. This leads to less abuse and violent events than prison, because when adults are with teens, abuse and bullying are prone to happen because the adults are bigger and stronger. People also think that the detention centers are low security, but indeed there are maximum security, like the maximum security youth facility in Nebraska. This is according to impact law. There's a lower chance of repeat offenses, and they automatically enroll you into the family functional therapy program. These solutions are a lot more effective and better for the overall well-being of teens. So taking this into account, what can you do to help? You can help spread the message that this is not the right way to do it, that teens should not be incarcerated with adults because it's not effective or safe. You can donate to GoFundMes and individuals that have had trauma, and also contact local representatives. Now that I have told you about good communication techniques, juvenile detention programs, and communication techniques, it's time to summarize what I went over. Juvenile delinquency is normal, so they should not be incarcerated with adults. What I have talked about today is why teens have had the urge to be insubordinate, why teens should not be incarcerated with adults, and discuss good alternatives for breaking teens out of the insubordinate cycle. As I said earlier, it doesn't matter where you grow up or what racial demographic you become in. All teens go through a delinquent phase at some point. People who get over this phase, like I talked about earlier, are able to go about it normal life way better. I hope that this is clear, that teens should not be incarcerated with adults, and I hope you join the fight. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.